brand new project, which will take the name of You Wonder, and it is the new Law and Gender Chair that will be coordinated by my friend and colleague Elettra Stradella, who was also the brilliant coordinator of the ELaN, European Law and Gender Jean Monnet module. So first of all, I give the floor to the project officer of our ELaN action, Dr. Bochenek. Welcome. She's also the project officer of my Jean Monnet action. So I'm very glad to see you, Monica, and I give you the floor, please. Welcome.
Thank you. But Italy is so successful in Jean Monnet that unfortunately we have to share. I have to share with a colleague because we have too many projects. We will not be able to follow all of you. So I'm a dedicated officer to Italy, but modules and Center of Excellence. And my colleague, maybe you know her, Ilenia Destito. She's responsible for chairs. So it will be for a new project of Elettra. You will pass to my colleague for the chair and other actions from the new actions and also the previous the legacy, like projects, support to associations and so on. So we have to share, but this is very good. You have a great success rate and it's very nice. And I'm super happy to be here because the time passed quickly, and I remember when the project started, and I was very, very new in Jean Monnet, and I really enjoy because Elettra was always updating me what's going on about the conferences, about what. So I feel that I know this project, which I don't have occasions so much know all of them because we have a lot in our portfolios. So I'm happy that there is also this continuation. So it's becoming chair afterwards. But I'm here to just, I wish to present you slightly, the funding opportunities that we have in Jean Monnet. This is also I will share my short. Do you see my presentation? I have a short.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let me see if I can do.
You share the screen, but
Yeah,
we don't see anything.
It is deep black.
Okay. Okay. Not this. And now?
Not yet.
Oh gosh, I have some problems with Team because they were changing something on my computer, and now
maybe if you want to send to me your presentation, we can share the presentation.
We can maybe I will restart. Let's see if it works, and if not, I will send, or I will just talk. Let me check. Maybe now. Now?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. So. Yes, so I was presented. I'm Monika Bochenek. I'm the project advisor and responsible for Italy Jean Monnet projects, but with my colleague Ilenia. You know probably all more or less already what is the Jean Monnet actions and which is coming from. So I don't, I will not stay long on this. I want to just insist, underline that this is about the EU studies. So what is related to the not only EU integration, but any EU policy, any EU legislation that it's currently developed at the EU level. And we are happy to have this great Jean Monnet network. You as project officers, you are also part of this network, and project officer, sorry, project coordinators, you are part of the network. We have this community of them, of the all Jean Monnet professors. They are undertaking the projects, and that takes place on Teams platform, and I see that it's active. People, they announce the events, they share the things, and so on, and it's great that we can, and it's all around the world. So as of last year, 21, we tried to give even more this remind potential applicants what is the scope of the action, and what should be taken into account when developing a project, because the relevance of the project is the main issue, and we try to keep to this. So this this European dimension, European angle, that it should be in each of the project that it's supposed to be selected. But of course, the subject, the thematics evolved. So we are not now, like maybe at the beginning of Jean Monnet program, we are not anymore only this very historical aspect, or EU integration typical aspects, or EU law, these typical domains, but it's coming beyond, because we have very subjects, and this module it's an example of it, that you can tackle any thematics, always, of course, in relation to the EU law, to the EU dimension. But we are much more open that this typical EU integration, what we call. So this year, I cannot really talk about the new call because it's not published yet. We expect the new program guide to be published in early November, probably. But we don't expect a lot of changes as of this year call. There are no any revolutionary change. So what we propose this year, and will be probably reconducted. So this is this typical part of the Jean Monnet, it's like we say classic Jean Monnet, so teaching and research. And here we have these 3 actions. So we have modules, chairs, and center of excellence. And today we meet at the conference of a module. Maybe tomorrow we will meet at the conference of a new chair program project. And hopefully maybe even center of excellence one day. So this one does this classical possibilities of teaching in research programs. So this is for the higher education institutions. But Jean Monnet recently opened also to the schools, to the primary and secondary schools, and they are offering something also combined, because teacher training, it's not only the schools, but often there are also higher education institutions that offer training for the schools. So they supposed to prepare teachers of the school how to learn about EU, and give them possibilities to include the subjects in the school program. Learning EU initiative, it's really for the schools, so the projects comes directly from the school. And this is about how they are teaching EU in the schools. They do some study visits, some exchanges, and so on. And we have also, from last year, we also came back to the networks. So in this big strand policy debate, we have networks, which are those thematic networks. So the Commission wished to put accent to focus on some thematics and wish to create these networks of higher education institutions that will prepare feedback to the Commission, prepare some papers, some reports on the specific issues. And there are always one which is EU internal issue, we can say like this, so an EU policy, and one foreign policy. So some it's open to the higher education institutions from outside EU, and it will be rather on this foreign policy aspect. So they're the minimum of some, of 7 organizations or 12 even, depends on the network. And it's I think every year Commission will propose a thematic, and we are searching for this kind of network. So soon we will publish the thematic for the next year. But we have also these networks of the schools, but this is, of course, it's not thematic. It's about it's a kind of possibilities for the schools to meet, to exchange, to give possibility to the teachers to see how they teach a EU subject in different school. So of course, you as a higher education institution, you cannot maybe apply for all the actions, but hopefully you can also pass a word, because I know that sometimes you work with the schools and you can pass, the message also to the schools that they have these possibilities to be part of the Jean Monnet actions. So this was from last year. So as I said, so generally Italy is very successful in Jean Monnet projects, and in the last framework we received a lot of applications, and a lot of them they were selected because they are of the high quality. And of course, we are happy of this. So you see, the success rate is quite consistent. It's much higher than the average success rate. So this is good. And universities and schools are active in all actions. So it's a great, so I think it works. I think probably national agency will do also good job, and you have probably also a lot of exchanges and interactions between universities. So so that's great. And then there are a few links, but probably you know that you can find in general information on the Erasmus program. But as I said, the new program is coming. It's not published yet. Of course, then there is funding and other opportunities where you're supposed to apply. But also for some inspirations for thematics, or also to search who is doing what. Sometimes it's also a way to find the other universities. They are tackle the same thematics under Jean Monnet project. You can find in the directory or under the project results platform. So there are sometimes it can be useful. And voila, this is my contact. So anyway, if you need if you need anything from us, you are always invited to contact us. But okay, I think the project coordinators, they know very well they don't maybe need any specific, but if your partners, if the participants of the conference, they wish to get some more information about these funding opportunities, I'm happy to reply, or my colleagues will reply. So please free to contact us. Thank you very much. I hope that it was a general overview of the actions with no details. It was just to let you know what is available, and I leave you to your very this deep discussions and more on the specific. It's a very specific, and I think I will come back to Elettra on this, because it's this is a really, I think, very good project, and and it's a good practice, and I will be probably in touch with you later on this and on your new chair project, so maybe we can a bit, even explode more the results around. But now I'm wishing you the very, very fruitful conference, this final. I think you have a lot of things to share and be proud of it. So good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. I trust that your presentation will encourage many researchers in proposing new Jean Monnet actions. And yeah, now it's my turn. And I just want to resume in the first part of my presentation the experience of this project, of this before than a project, a group of colleagues and friends. European Law and Gender, yeah, as Monica also said a moment ago, tempus fugit. And it seems like yesterday when we discussed, you and me, Elettra, the project of a Jean Monnet action dedicated to the gender dimensions of European law. And let me summarize the results delivered by this ELaN project in these 3 years. 3 undergraduate courses, the first of this kind at the University of Pisa, and a kind of course with relatively few courses like this in Italy. I don't think there are many courses like this. 3 PhD seminar series, a moot court, and 3 consecutive years training courses for lawyers. At least 4 events, international events, an international workshop dedicated to young researchers, an international conference dedicated to the 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Convention, and this final conference. And besides that, a bunch of deliverables, a syllabus of cases and materials, which was the base of a volume edited by a group of us, but led by Elettra, Law and Gender in a European Perspective, diritto e genere nella prospettiva europea. Is it in Italian? Perhaps we will, yeah, the first edition. We look forward to an English edition in the next years. And a book edited by Elettra, again, Gender-Based Approaches to the Law and Jurisdiction in Europe, and a book edited by Valentina Bonini, the 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Convention. And I don't see Giovanna Spanò, but there is a very lively blog, a beautiful blog indeed, which is curated, edited by the amazing Giovanna Spanò. And last not least, as I said before, this new chair, and also before and beyond the chair, I must say that European Law and Gender, along with its sibling Jean Monnet module, Solidarity in Europe, led by our colleague Leonardo Pasquali. But these two modules have been the drivers behind a group of colleagues and friends very much committed to European legal studies. So, what can I say as a private lawyer on access to justice and access justice from a law and gender perspective? I'd like to follow an old maxim of the Italian feminism, partire da sé, and then I shall move from my own experience, which is the experience of a researcher in European private law, where I believe the adjective private should be very much put into parentheses. This is because one of the more exciting and more challenging, perhaps, characteristics of European law is that it is experimental in nature and challenges the great division between private and public. So, bearing this experimental nature of European law in mind, I'd like to shed some light on the relationship between women's access to justice and in Europe and the concept of justice developed by the European Union. The idea of justice behind the European Union experiment has been appropriately, I believe, characterized as a sui generis model of justice and quite expressively dubbed access justice. So what is the European access justice model about? In a nutshell, it is about access to the market. At the first glance, it is not very exciting, one may think. According to Article 26 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, the Union shall adopt measures with the aim of establishing or ensuring the functioning of the internal market. The internal market, which is defined as an area without internal frontiers in which the free movement of goods, persons, services and capital is ensured. So the commitment to establishing and ensuring the function of the internal market makes of the European Union the archetypal market state. Market state is a relatively new category coined in the field of international political studies. In the words of the scholar who coined this formula, Philip Bobbitt, market states are the expression of an age where the production and circulation of wealth become increasingly disconnected from nation states. National debts are increasingly owned by foreign investors, and the budgets for welfare provisions are put under strain by the aging of population that moved after World War II. How access justice differs from traditional concept of social justice rooted in the nation state experience. Again, with a very broad brush, the European Union is a legal and political entity that finds its legitimacy in the establishment and functioning of a transnational internal market. The only precedent, not by chance, I think, is perhaps the post-war Western Germany. So imaginatively and perspicuously depicted by Michel Foucault in his Naissance of Naissance de la biopolitique. So this idea of justice represents a striking departure from both the traditional paradigms of statehood and the concept of justice developed by European nation states in the aftermath of the Second World War. The European Union is not about the exercise of the monopoly of violence over a territory, as Max Weber would have said. It is not about the wealth of a particular nation. The European Union is about creating a space of economic freedom beyond national borders. And above all, the European Union's idea of justice differs profoundly from that developed by the regulatory state over the 20th century, as its focus is not as much on the redistribution of wealth from richer to poorer layers of society, but it is very much on laying the foundations of a highly competitive social market economy, aiming at full employment and social progress. So the synthesis could be from regulation as remedy to inequality to regulation as both remedy to and prevention of market failures. Contrary to the conventional narrative, this does not imply that the European Union law lacks a social dimension, but it does imply that the purpose of social integration is served by market integration. The question is, to which point can be served, especially in these times. Gender equality and anti-discrimination policy have been critical in the establishment of the single market from the outset, from the very beginning. Article 119 of the Rome Treaty, which is the current 141 and 157 of the Treaty on the Functioning. With insight, one can easily appreciate how a policy of non-discrimination between men and women, and indeed any non-discrimination policy, is critical to the establishment of a competitive labor market. Yet, this was not the original intent of the treaty drafters. The rule of equal pay of men and women was pushed very much by France in order to avoid competition distortions among member states. With little awareness and let alone willingness of the huge legal and societal repercussions of idea of equal pay between men and women. In order to grasp the force of this new rule, we can only reflect on the fact that in both post-war US and Europe, statutory labor protections were largely tailored on the male, white, of course, worker, seen as the earner of a breadwinner wage. In the process of finalizing the British National Insurance Act, William Beveridge, the founding father of the UK's welfare state, wrote that the Act treats married women as a special class of occupied persons and treats men and wives as a team on the understanding that the great majority of married women must be regarded as occupied on work, which is vital, though unpaid, without which their husbands could not do their paid work, and without which the work of the nation could not survive. This is the very paradigm of the distinction between productive and reproductive work. And again, with insight, we can now look at the immersion of the principle of gender equality in 1957 Europe as a paradigmatic case of heterogonie der Zwecken, heterogenesis of the ends. In tandem with the prohibition of discrimination on grounds of nationality, the rule on equal payment became a powerful tool in the hands of the European lawmakers, both the Commission and the ECJ, for dismantling public and private barriers to access to the transnational labor market. Both rules were firmly anchored to the free movement of workers and freedom of establishment. Both rules, both prohibition of discriminations, were firmly anchored in market freedoms. With the Treaty of Amsterdam, 1997, the EU gained the competence to legislate against discrimination on a self-standing basis, without having to rely on market freedoms. So Article 13 of the Treaty of Amsterdam, which is nowadays Article 19 of the Treaty on the Functioning, rejects discriminations on ground of sex, racial or ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, age, or sexual orientations. Secondary legislation and ECJ case law, mangled, just as an example, followed suit. So we had the 2043 Directive on Equal Treatment irrespective of racial or ethnic origins, the Framework Directive 2078 on equal treatment in employment relations covering age, disability, religion and belief, sexual orientation, etc. And the Gender Directive on the prohibition of discrimination in the delivery of goods and services. With the Lisbon Treaty, the Charter of Fundamental Rights was given the same legal force of European Union primary legislation, and the grounds of discrimination further expanded along different lines this time, from market integration to international human rights law. Again, Article 21 forbids any discrimination based on any ground, such as sex, race, color, ethnic or social origin, genetic features, language, religion or belief, political or any other opinion, membership of a national minority, property, birth, disability, age, or sexual orientation. So in the vision of the European Union Commission, this move of anti-discrimination law from market integration to human rights was projected in a way within the wider frame of the constitutional transformation of the European Union, beyond access to the market for labor, goods and services of all sorts, to include access to European society. This was a constitutional move that in that time preluded to the idea of a next move towards a kind of federal statehood. But again, with insight, we must acknowledge, and there is a very valuable scholarship, critical scholarship, that has acknowledged that the principle of non-discrimination gained in extension, but lost in coherence and depth. In the European Union primary law, discrimination based on gender and nationality is prohibited per se and enjoys direct vertical and horizontal effects. But the scope of application is limited to the field of employment and occupation. The other grounds of discrimination in the treaties are submitted to complex balancing procedures leading to hierarchies in the levels of protection. If we change our focus from primary to secondary law, the picture is slightly different. Here, the prohibition of race discrimination enjoys a wider scope of application compared to all other forms of discrimination, gender discrimination included. So, and I'm going to conclude my introduction. The fragmentation of the supposedly unitary non-discrimination principle in different personal statuses enjoyed by different vulnerable groups fits very well with the narrative, with Duncan Kennedy's narrative of the third globalization of law and legal thought, as characterized by an ever-growing tendency to the differentiation based on identity rights. The contemporary, I'm quoting Kennedy, the contemporary idea is a legal regime that is pluralist in the sense of appropriately recognizing and managing difference. As a result, both in primary and secondary law, the intersectional dimensions of discriminations are muted. How fits access to justice in this picture? The European Union access justice model depends on the granting of individual rights that have to be enforced primarily by the court system. Individual information of consumers and workers is paramount. The emphasis on information disclosure is both coherent with the trend towards the individualizing of social institutions and functional to the hierarchization and fragmentation of the levels of protection along the lines of group-based identities in competition with each other. A key question is then whether access justice can cut across these functionally differentiated groups to promote social inclusion. And this is where I believe the access to justice enters the picture as a structural element of access to justice. Article 47 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union recognizes a right to an effective remedy and a fair trial. But court-based litigation is still very much tailored on fragmented and hierarchized individual rights. In order to cater to and respond to the demands of social inclusion, new forms of administrative management of collectively shared identities and new forms of conflict resolution are emerging. But this chapter of European Union non-discrimination law is almost entirely to be written. Just as an example, from the definition of collective identities to the requirements for representation, it is not clear who can legitimately defend whose interests. And again, to the issues raised by remedies, there is a trove of challenging and more than challenging, compelling, I would say, questions open to research, to teaching, and also to dissemination. And yes, I trust, I believe this conference and the brand new Jean Monnet chair here by my side will make an excellent work again. Thank you, Elettra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina, for your introduction, for your speech. My friend, Valentina, because as she said, the European Law and Gender module was a common project. We discussed it in 2019, before COVID-19. Yes. And we succeeded in the funding of this project, together with the colleague Leonardo Pasquali and Francesca Martinez, the colleague of European Law in the Department of Law that had the funding of the Solidarity module, the module on solidarity. And I believe that it is a very important experience for our Department of Law, because we are the starters from this point of view. The Department of Law of the University of Pisa never had the funding of such kind of European projects, then it was a very important moment.
In Italy, we have a way to say meglio tardi che mai.
Meglio tardi che mai. Exactly. Thank you very much, Valentina. And now we can start with our first panel. Then maybe Chiara Correndo can come here. We have our three speakers. Maria Chiara Locchi and Paola Parolari are in teams. Please, Chiara. Okay. This first panel is going to focus on access to justice, gender, and multiculturalism. And I want to thank our three speakers. Chiara Correndo is here, and you can see Paola Parolari and Maria Chiara Locchi. I'm going to do only some considerations, some reflections to introduce the interventions and the discussions that I hope we'll have after the three interventions. The issue of a relationship between multiculturalism and women's rights is very important. We know in political philosophy, in legal theory, but it's also very important from the point of view of constitutional and comparative law, criminal and private law, of course. As we will discuss in this session, the conflictual approach that tended to characterize the debate, especially on some feminist sides, is today largely replaced by the attempt to decolonize the discourse on the compatibility of the protection of the rights of religious and cultural minorities with the empowerment of women's rights. In this panel, we will deal with many of the concepts that cross the reflection on the relationship between multiculturalism as policy and as ideology, legal tools of interculturality, and the protection of women's rights when they belong to minorities in which gender roles sometimes or often construction defines phenomena of subordination. I believe that there are three elements that we have to take into consideration planning this panel, and I took these three elements into consideration when I imagined to start this conference with this panel. These three elements are strongly interconnected. The first element is given by what I call the multicultural fact, by the recognition of the not homogeneous composition of liberal democracies, within which different cultural and value systems now confront each other, not only for the ideological pluralism that is inherent to them, but due to the presence of minority communities carrying different legal cultures, which often reflect into minority legal systems, giving rise to that legal pluralism that we are going to investigate during this panel, starting from the first intervention by Paola Parolari. The second element lies in the consideration that, as our speaker, Paola Parolari, wrote in one of her many essays on this topic, the cultural feature of national law influences the substantial equality in the protection of fundamental rights of different people according to the legal traditions that they followed in their action and relationships. Indeed, the choices made by policymakers are necessarily affected by historical, epistemological, and ethical categories to which their legal culture refers. This means that the first element that I talk about introduces in legal systems a fragmentation that reverberates on the protection of rights and on the implementation of the principle of equality, at least formal, to be enforced through the substantial one. If it is true that equality, in its meaning of rationality, we can say, implies that we know that the same situations must be treated in a uniform way and the situations that are different from each other in a different way. I believe that through the principle of participation, we could try to find a synthesis that pursues pluralism without causing a pulverization of rights or a strengthening of asymmetries. The third element, the approach that explains the relationship between multiculturalism and gender equality in conflicting terms. Of course, I refer above all to Susan Moller-Rowkin, we know. Also, it was fundamental to suggest a more sensitive approach to the actual condition of women belonging to certain religious and cultural groups can lead only to the unacceptable solution of adopting assimilationist policies and refusing intercultural dialogue as potentially involving the so-called non-negotiable value of gender equality. Then we have to find an alternative, and the alternative is to use a gender analysis that focuses on how the universality of women's rights and above all the conceptual as well the political centrality of emancipation achieved by participation and liberation finds its grounds in the awareness of the universality of female oppression, the universality of the hierarchization of gender relations, and the affirmation of natural difference as a powerful instrument of inferiorization and exclusion of women from the social contract. In this view, the majority-minority dichotomy, the dichotomy between dominant culture, minority cultures becomes veiled. That doesn't mean adopting a feminism of equality that we know leveled radical differences existing among women, which can and must be faced through the lens of intersectionality, but it means knowing how oppression acts in all places, in all times, and in all forms. Then we'll focus in this panel on the fundamental instrument of agency, because the instrument of agency, on the other hand, on a different point of view, seen from a philosophical point of view as the possibility for women to self-represent themselves inside and outside the family and the socio-cultural context, needs also a legal meaning. Cannot be only a philosophical approach, but needs a legal focus, a legal meaning that can find its guiding principle, I believe, in the participatory profile of equality. Women must be part of the definition of their rules, both within minority groups and in the general state legal systems, and their voice must resound in decision-making processes, in particular those concerning their fundamental rights, and they should have the possibility to contribute in establishing the measure of the fundamentality of the rights themselves. Internal participation in minority groups seems apparently more difficult to achieve because it requires, of course, negotiation between the majority that is supposed to be orienting towards the full implementation of gender equality and the minority that is supposed to be unwilling to give up a hierarchy of gender relations centered on male domination. But the negotiation can take place, as many authors we know have pointed out. For example, we can say Susan Williams and also other authors, through the creation of incentives which make the effective inclusion of women in participatory processes and the existence of internal rules that include their vision of religious or cultural belonging, conditions of the recognition of minority legal systems. Clearly, a larger female presence is not sufficient because it must join with the democratization of power and political institutions, but it's fundamental, it's necessary. These transformative incentives, however, must also concern the external participation to minority group. What I mean, the problem is not only the definition of the rules within minorities as an essential aspect to ensure the constitutional sustainability of regulatory pluralism, but also the participation of minorities more generally in the public space and the inclusion of minorities in the constitutional scenario achievable primarily through the sharing of the legal and political status of citizenship, is fundamental. Of course, the topic is not here the topic of the regulation of the citizenship, but I believe that citizenship is an essential step in the construction of the agency of minority women, in recognition of minority women. I believe that the attribution of citizenship, and this is a very strong problem today in Italy, we know, and is also debated in the political scenario. We know the attribution of citizenship primarily to migrant women, girls, and children born on the national territory would be an instrument, a fundamental instrument for substantial equality, for the achievement of self-representation, the overcoming of invisibility, and it represents a true positive action, which would give minority women the opportunity to speak for themselves, but also to contribute to a fruitful hybridization of national law and the development of a sustainable constitutionalism. Okay, I'm sorry because I speak too much. Now I want to leave the chair to discuss on this concept that I tried to introduce, multiculturalism and interculturalism, and the lens, the approach of intersectionality and women's citizenship, and so on and so forth, with our brilliant and beautiful speakers. Paola Parolari is the first. Paola Parolari is tenured researcher in legal theory. I choose to start with legal theory, of course. We can understand this choice just from my introduction. At the University of Brescia, and she wrote many articles, many works, and 2 important books on cultural norms, feminist perspective, women's rights, interlegality, and the role of the courts, that are fundamental milestones in the contemporary reflection on these themes. Paola Parolari will focus on the theoretical framework surrounding the issue of the impact of interlegality on women's rights. She will use the concepts of agency and empowerment, exploring the relationships between these 2 aspects, and interlegality, of course, looking at its various and different meanings. Thank you, Paola. I leave the chair.
Thank you to you, Elettra, for this amazing introduction, which touched all the topics that I think I will discuss with you, and so thank you, because you made my task very much easier. Needless to say that women's access to justice in multicultural context is a very complex issue, which can be approached in many ways depending on the perspective you take and the aspect you focus on. We could start with the concept of justice itself, how we understand justice. I will adopt a narrow sense of justice, understood as the access to mechanism and institution to the solution of legal disputes, but we could use also other meanings and look at how a given society, when a given society could be considered as just or fair in Rawls terms. So we have different approaches. My approach is limited to the access to mechanism for the resolution of disputes. And in my talk, I would like to approach the issue from the perspective of legal pluralism, understood as a situation in which 2 or more legal systems coexist in the same social field. This is a classical definition by Sally and Mary. Well, actually, this is no less complex, so I apologize in advance for the inevitable simplifications that the need for synthesis entails. Just a premise, I don't want to get bogged down in the discussion about the definition of law, since, as anyone who grappled with the issue of legal pluralism knows, this is an endless, and I would say dead-end discussion. Nonetheless, I want to make clear that, to me, law is not limited to state law in any way. I'm persuaded that the state does not have a monopoly of the legal sphere, and that several other kinds of law coexist and sometimes compete with it, not only international law, European law, supranational law, transnational law, but also customary law, and although I know that this is very controversial, also religious laws, such as, for instance, Islamic law, which I tried to approach in the past. In this perspective, many of the claims made by members of groups, of cultural groups, I think they are grounded in norms and customs that they perceive as binding and which they would probably call legal, at least if they would be willing to adopt Western conceptual coordinates, which, by the way, cannot be taken for granted. So let me go back to women. In the lively and I would say sometimes even stormy feminism versus multiculturalism debate, the issue of legal pluralism has gained increasing attention in recent years. Usually in the field of political and legal philosophy, the analysis develops in a normative perspective, trying to find out what solutions might be more suited to grant the protection of women's rights in multicultural contexts. And the fundamental question is, how could or should we grant the coexistence of different legal norms, customs, traditions, and institutions without challenging women's rights? So one could maybe rephrase the Hawking famous question. Elettra mentioned Hawking before, is multiculturalism bad for women? And ask, is customary or religious law or justice bad for women? I have addressed this very issue in the past by arguing that the conflict between the recognition of cultural differences and the protection of human rights may sometimes be only apparent, in the sense that the fundamental rights of persons belonging to cultural minorities, including women, cannot be fully protected without taking into account the legal complexity in which they are immersed. And central to this argument is the concept of interlegality, understood as the dynamic counterpart of legal pluralism, that is to say, as the interactions and intersections between different legal orders that coexist in a given social space, as the definition of legal pluralism that I given before says. The idea is that intersections and interactions between these legal orders or systems influence the way in which both social actors and judges relate to law, determining an interplay of actions and reactions that deviates significantly from the typical dynamics of state-centric legal experience. Indeed, on the one hand, the way social actors navigate between different legal spaces or islands forces judges to come to terms with the polycentric nature of the sources of law. And on the other hand, the attitudes of judges toward disputes arising from the interaction between different legal spaces, we could say interlegal disputes, cannot help to influence the strategies of social actors in managing their relationships and pursuing their goals. On other occasions, I focused mainly on how national judges try to deal with such legal complexity. So in particular, I tried to take some examples from the experience of Muslim women in European countries to explain how and why the failure of the state law to grant Islamic law a minimum level of recognition may lead to deny those women, Muslim women, the protection of both state and Islamic law, thus exposing them to risk of not having their fundamental rights fully protected. For instance, if this is a classical issue in Islamic family law studies, if we do not grant any recognition to Islamic marriage, the many Muslim women who enter in a religious-only marriage in a European country will be left without the protection provided by state law in case of divorce. So this is kind of conundrum. Today, I want to use the concept of interlegality to focus instead on the other side of the coin, that is on cultural minority women themselves. And I want to share with you some reflections on how they concretely relate to the issues concerning their access to justice in contexts of legal pluralism. More precisely, I want to call your attention on the strategies of agency and empowerment that Elettra has anticipated, enacted by women, trying to cast some light on the relationship between agency, empowerment, and interlegality. So now, before going any further, I think I need to say something, just a few words about the concept of interlegality to explain how it is understood here and why I find it useful in addressing the issue of access to justice from a gender perspective. As you certainly know, the term interlegality has been introduced by the legal sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos in 1987. In its original sense, the concept aimed at capturing the condition of social actors living in the network of legal orders that characterizes the contemporary globalized world. These social actors are forced, in Santos' words, are forced to constant transitions and transpassings from one legal order to another. And thus, to borrow Letizia Mancini's words, we can say that Santos adopts a subjective perspective that foregrounds the social actor and the norms of different origins that influence his or her actions and choices. So, subjective perspective. This approach is actually common to a great number of studies that have investigated the interactions between different legal orders or systems within the same social context, regardless of whether they actually refer to Santos or specifically use the notion of interlegality. There are plenty of studies since the 70s, at least, in which many social anthropological analyses have applied a similar actor-oriented perspective to the analysis of legal pluralism in both Western immigration countries and post-colonial countries. This actor-oriented approach has made it possible to pay attention to the way in which people use the law, with reference not only to forum shopping strategies, but also to what has been called discourse shopping, that is, practices through which social actors move among different legal repertoires, renegotiating their meanings, concepts, and determining their hybridization. Well, to me, interlegality means all of that. I must say that along the way, the term interlegality has taken on a life of its own, sometimes departing from the meaning originally ascribed to it, especially when it has adopted in when it has been adopted in different social fields of studies. For example, two resourceful legal theorists such as Jan Klabbers and Gianluigi Palombella have recently proposed an objective legal notion of interlegality as opposed to the subjective sociological notion introduced by Santos, aiming at shifting the epistemic perspective, they say, of the lawyers and legal scholars from the idea of law as a system to the idea of law as a comprehensive and composite reality whose texture is given by the interplay between a plurality of different legalities. Interlegality, in this case, is not defined as the phenomenological counterpart of legal pluralism, as it is by Santos, but it indicates the opposite of legal pluralism, where under legal pluralism is understood as a theory according to which different legal orders are assumed to coexist as discrete and separate systems. Within this legal theory's paradigm of interlegality, judges are called upon to consider all norms relevant to the solution of the case, whatever legal systems they belong to. And as a result, and this is a very much important difference with Santos' perspective, in this perspective, in the legal theory's perspective, the result of this understanding of interlegality is that a practice such as forum shopping, which is central to Santos' perspective, would be an unnecessary practice or strategy because the judges is called to take into account the norms. We don't need to look for the best forum for us. These new analyses on interlegality have very important merits. However, today I will still rely on Santos' perspective since it is specifically tailored to focus on the role of social actors, so not judges specifically, but social actors, in unleashing the empowerment potential of intersecting and interacting legalities, especially when these social actors are marginalized people. Indeed, in his search for a new legal common sense, as the title of his main book says, Santos is mainly interested in those subjects on the margin of society and the way in which they make use of the tools offered by different legal orders, combining them in creative ways in their own struggles for emancipation. I think that the concept of interlegality understood in this way proves to be very useful in examining the strategies of agency enacted by women belonging to cultural and religious minorities to reach new forms of social and legal empowerment. Now, these women's strategies may be very heterogeneous depending on many factors. In particular, being a woman and belonging to a cultural or religious minority may be very different experience in Western migration countries or in post-colonial countries. So I want to make clear once again that I have in mind the first case, and in particular, I think to Muslim women in European countries as a paradigmatic case of minority within minority. In this regard, several studies have shown that Muslim women in Europe often move back and forth between the different but overlapping legal spaces defined respectively by the law of the state and Islamic law. In addition, in several circumstances, they prove to be prone to navigate the sea of international human rights law as well, to challenge either one or the other of such legal spaces, depending on the case. For instance, sometimes Muslim women apply to the European Court of Human Rights to challenge state law rules, such as in the case of prohibition of Islamic headscarf. But there are also cases in which Muslim women apply to challenge the application of Islamic law, such as in the case Molla Sali versus Greek. Therefore, if we are to investigate the issue of their access to justice, we must, I think, examine how Muslim women exercise their agency in deciding whether to turn to community-based forms of ADR or instead to state courts or even to international tribunals. And we need to do so without prejudices and biases. For instance, think again to the issue of divorce, but this time from a different perspective than the state judges one that I mentioned before. We could maybe try to ask to ourselves, since state judges in European countries do not have the jurisdiction and authority to dissolve Islamic religious marriages, should we tolerate community-based forms of ADR that deal with the Islamic divorce? In this regard, we should remember that according to Islamic law, Muslim men can repudiate their wives, while Muslim women cannot divorce without their husband's consent or without the intervention of an Islamic judge. Nonetheless, as you know, there are no Islamic judges in European countries, and as I've just said, state judges do not have the jurisdiction and authority to dissolve Islamic marriages. Therefore, should their husband deny them Islamic divorce, Muslim women would be unable to go on with their lives and enter in new relationships and maybe eventually remarry without violating Islamic law. They would be chained wives. And even if their civil marriages was dissolved, they still would be trapped in an Olympic religious marriage. So to avoid this, should we tolerate, I ask once again, should we tolerate the existence of some kinds of community-based ADR system that try to make up somehow for the lack of Islamic judges in European countries? This issue has been very much discussed in the UK in relation to the diffusion of a number of Sharia councils that play exactly this role. And of course, it is many women who require their intervention for the reasons we've seen. Well, many scholars and activists for women's rights argue that we should not tolerate Sharia councils because they do not respect women's rights and gender equality. After all, they say, these councils apply the Sharia, which according to them is by definition detrimental to women's rights and gender equality. Furthermore, they think that women who seek the intervention of these councils instead of going to a state court do that only because of pressure from their families and communities in a patriarchal context. Now, there is no time here to consider the complex and plural character of Islamic law, which is far from the monolithic and static entity that is often painted by its critics, although of course there are problems with gender equality, at least in some conceptions of Islamic law. However, I think it is important today to say that it may not be necessarily the case that women who turn to community-based forms of ADR do so only because they are constrained by patriarchal cultural and religious contexts. Actually, we cannot rule out, first of all, the possibility that women freely decide to turn to Sharia counsel seeking Islamic divorce, either for genuine religious reasons or for different strategic reasons, or a combination of both. In this respect, it is very interesting to look at those studies based on fieldwork, which have focused on the plurality of ways in which women exercise their agency in deciding whether, when, and in what terms to address Sharia counsel. Indeed, these studies have found that choices of Muslim women regarding the norms to which to conform and the institution to which to entrust the resolution of their disputes are not to be read in exclusively identity terms or religious terms, and that it would be simplistic to think that women who approach Sharia councils are enclosed in enclaves, religious, cultural, or legal enclaves, and isolated from the rest of society. Rihanna Parvin points out very clearly that it is important, as important as religion is in Muslim women's lives, they do not live in the UK just in the religious perspective. They do not experience the crisis of their marriage relationship in a purely Islamic or religious context, but they navigate between English law, their own understanding of Sharia, their social and family ties, and the customary practice of the cultural group to which they belong. And Parvin warns that these multiple social spheres cannot be isolated from one another. So the concept of intersectionality that was mentioned by Elettra a few minutes ago. Thus, the Sharia councils are at the center of complex dynamics in which religious affiliation coexists with a plurality of other affiliations, legal university intermingle as a result of discourse shopping processes, and the agency of women is expressed also through the forum shopping. Do not think only that forum shopping can be carried out or exercised between Sharia councils and state courts. There is also forum shopping between different Sharia councils, depending on the orientation that the scholars who sit in this council show to have. These dynamics condition the interactions between Islamic law and state law, contributing to a process of renegotiations of the meaning of one and the other system. For this reason, the work of Sharia Council cannot be understood independently of the context in which the matrimonial disputes in relation to which they are called upon to intervene arise and develop. And on the other hand, symmetrically, even some decision of English courts on cases of marriage and divorce involving Muslims cannot be understood without taking into account the presence of Sharia councils and, more generally, Islamic minors legal orders in England. For Muslim women in Europe, identity reasons and strategic considerations often represent the two poles of an ambivalent relationship, within which different combinations and points of balance are possible. They choose between different venues for dispute resolution, taking into account also the advantages they feel they can gain in one or the other system. In this perspective, Pascal Fournier points out that religious and secular spheres are not experienced by Muslim women as two mutually exclusive domains, but rather as one highly complex battleground that distributes differentiated costs and benefits. In this context, the outcome of divorce is often perceived and played out by women as a conflict over the economic distribution of resources between the parties, and informal Sharia-based dispute resolution practices produce actually a myriad of negotiations and outcomes, shaping agency and bindingness. This is very important, shaping agency and bindingness in ways that require empirical evaluation. So much do they diverge from the classical Islamic model. So hybridization, as once again mentioned by Elettra a few minutes ago. All of this is interlegality. And the plurality of way in which Muslim women use state and Islamic law, as well as state courts and Sharia councils, show that in context of interlegality, to borrow a word from Janet Halley, we can say what is plural is not only normative orders and sources of law, but also pathways to decision, strategies, and outcomes. In fact, interlegality creates spaces for agency, and at the same time, the exercise of agency unleashes the empowerment potential of interlegality so that Muslim women can choose for themselves. For themselves. The empowerment strategies implemented by Muslim women challenge the intersectional gender and cultural stereotype according to which Muslim women are simply passive victims of who need to be saved from their patriarchal religion, family, and community, and call us to pay more attention to the heterogeneity of ways in which women may relate to the plurality of their affiliations and to the rules that each of these affiliations brings with it. Therefore, to me, the point is not that we have to decide a priori, once and for all, what jurisdiction is more respectful of women's rights, denying legitimacy to any other mechanism or institution for dispute resolution. The point is rather looking at the concrete practices implemented by Muslim women for managing the legal complexity in which they are immersed, trying eventually to figure out how we could foster their empowerment through the maximization of their margins of agency. So I think I can stop here. Thank you to everyone for the attention.
Thank you, Paola, for your speech. Now the turn is for Maria Chiara Locchi. Maria Chiara Locchi, that I want to thank. I'm very happy to know you. Maria Chiara is professor in comparative public law at the University of Perugia. She works in particular migration law and fundamental rights, law and religion, multiculturalism, minorities, with a specific attention on the role of Islamic minorities. I believe that in the field of public comparative law in Italy, we have Maria Chiara Locchi for the Islamic law, and now we have the young Giovanna Spanò here in Pisa. Maria Chiara Locchi is going to address the topic of participation and political representation of migrant women or women belonging to cultural and religious minorities in European countries with specific reference to the Islamic one. Thank you, Maria Chiara. I give you the floor.
Thank you. I prepared some PowerPoint presentation just to help you to follow my argument.
Yes, you can.
So
You can share the screen by yourself, but if you have any problems, I can share your presentation because I have it on my desktop.
I will try to do that because I use Teams for my lessons, but with Teams, each time is like it feels like the first time. So
I'm going to share it if you prefer.
I can try. Okay, I can see that. Yes, if you can share it.
Maria Chiara, you have the 3 points. The 3 points near the webcam.
Yes. I have on my, because I didn't want to maybe share the entire screen, but only the PowerPoint presentation. But I just have my presentation open, but I can see on the Windows functions. Okay. So I will share the screen. Sorry. Maybe. Okay, so now you see my screen and my PowerPoint, I think.
Perfect.
Okay, and you see that they go, no? They go, okay, thank you. So thank you to the organizers of the conference and to Professor Stradella in particular. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in Pisa. For personal reasons, I couldn't be able to join you. I would also like to, let's say, report myself as a non-expert of law and gender studies. So I hope that my presentation, the things I will say will not sound too simplistic or naive to you. So the title of my presentation is The Political Participation and Representation of Muslim Women in European Democracies. So first of all, why this topic in a conference dedicated to access to justice from a gender perspective? I could try to answer by trying to define access to justice in a broader sense than having a case heard in a court law. If we depict access to justice as all the elements needed to enable citizens to demand that the rights are upheld, maybe we could be able to include in this definition also the political sphere. So in this sense, in this broader sense, access to justice as access to a full and effective involvement in the democratic circuit. But I think that speaking about religious minorities and migrant women in Europe, and in particular about Muslim women, maybe there's no need to make huge efforts to find a formalistic justification. Because putting together access to justice, Muslim women, political participation and representation is intended to show that we have a problem. Muslim women hopefully succeed in having the rights protected, and even before that in being acknowledged as citizens in the legal and judicial domain, with the legal judicial domain that we have to look at in all its complexity, like as Paola just explained to us. So courts, judges can be seen as the defenders of fundamental rights and liberties of those subjects, and here's the problem, who are formally or substantially prevented from participating in the political process. Political process that, as you know, is that process of adopting the decisions that will also affect your own condition and the condition of your communities. So from this perspective, maybe my presence here is more about a tension between access to justice, rights protection, democracy, gender, and multiculturalism. Where the highly problematic political dimension of rights protection in our constitutional states indicates that there is a short circuit. My intention was to begin with some definitions, clarifications about the concept you find in the title of my contribution, but I realized that there's no time. So I won't do that, and I will take for granted the main concepts I will talk about. So European Islam, European Muslim women, political participation and representation, and European democracies. So what I'll do is try to map the conditions of Muslim women, of Muslim women's active presence in the political arena, making some considerations about the political and legal factors that affect both the quantitative and qualitative dimension of this active presence. So when I talk of political participation, I intend the ability of joining political parties and cultural or religious associations active in the civic and political realm. So Muslim citizens and Muslim women in particular may wish to join a political party, both secular or religiously oriented. As for secular parties, Muslims may wish to join a political party expressly mobilizing as Muslims, that is to say, declaring their Islamic background and supporting an Islamic oriented political agenda, or not, And this second option is the prevailing one, quoting Berger, generally the representation of Muslims in political positions like municipal councils, parliaments or government is often not on a religious ticket as Muslim, but on a political ticket such as a socialist, liberal and even Christian Democrat. So 3 points could be made about that. First point, for Muslim women, to the extent that they often visibly show their cultural and religious identity by wearing a veil or a headscarf, there's obviously a sort of presumption of cultural or religious connotation, an automatic ascription to a group, that of Muslim women, that is able to produce some very controversial reactions, with a problematic process of ethnicization in terms of being trapped in a specific ethnic and religious minority, with that single aspect of a person's identity, the ethnic and religious belonging, determining how she is represented and what topics she can address. So this is a very important and a first controversial aspect. Second point, legally speaking, we should verify if there could be a problem of discrimination in terms of political parties that directly or indirectly exclude or disadvantage persons as Muslims. Generally speaking, in consolidating democracies, this doesn't happen. Political parties' statutes and internal regulations do not generally have restrictive clauses on the basis of ethnic or religious affiliations. In the UK, for example, there is a specific legislation to guarantee an equal access to political parties' membership, and parties are also allowed to undertake positive actions aimed at overcoming the underrepresentation of particular groups within elected bodies. Also, in light of these legal obligations, the main British parties have adopted internal codes of conducting that bind members of party officials, party members to respect equality, diversity, tolerance. In 2021, so last year, the Labour Party adopted the first Islamophobia code of conduct. Third point, clearly the lack of formal restrictive clauses on party membership does not automatically imply that Muslim citizens actually do have an effective space for political participation on equal terms. As for Muslim women, even if the situation is quite diversified, France, as you can imagine, is not the Netherlands or the UK in this respect. They generally have scarce visibility in European political parties. On the other hand, as Anna Van Zan observed, when actively involved, Muslim women are co-opted because they are a good sample of secular Muslims. For example, because they do not wear the hijab or they do not wear modest clothing, or on the contrary, they are involved because they are veiled and can therefore become a good vehicle for in order to win the support both of the Muslim community and of its sympathizers. As for Islamic-oriented parties, I refer here to those political parties and movements that aim to represent the interests of Muslim citizens and residents in European countries. Here the landscape is really diversified in respect of, first of all, ideological manifestos and political positioning of these parties and movements, starting from the equation that is wrong between Islamic-oriented party and Islamist party. Second point, these parties are highly diversified also with regard to electoral performances. Some of them have not yet participated in elections. They are very, very small parties or never succeeded in elect their candidates, while others have already elected their representatives at both the national and the local level. We can mention the Dutch party DENK, founded in 2015 with the aim of representing Muslim immigrants. DENK elected 3 members of parliaments at the lower house in both the 2017 and 2021 elections. Again, obviously, the presence of Islamic-oriented parties does not automatically entail an effective political participation of Muslim women. Leaving aside the big problematic issue that I'm mentioning here, but that pervades all I'm saying, of the risk of essentialism, that is to say that the very possibility to talk about women and also about Muslim women as a homogeneous entity that can be represented as a whole. From a legal perspective, another important aspect to consider when we talk about political participation and representation is the legal status of Muslim women. Professor Stradella mentioned that in her presentation, namely if they are national citizens or aliens. In any case, as regards specifically political participation, comparative research shows that in the European countries, migrants are generally allowed to participate in politics within movements, trade unions, political parties, religious associations. So generally, there is no formal barrier in this respect. As for political representation, here, as you know, the legal status national versus alien is crucial, since national legislation in Europe is varied in this respect, with more than half of European countries, including some consolidated democracies like France, Germany, and Italy, if we are a consolidated democracy, that exclude non-European immigrants from the right to vote and to be elected. So when the right to vote is excluded, the right to participate in politics and to be represented, politically represented, especially at the local level, may be enforced through other means, such as consultative bodies, which are directly or indirectly elected, individual or collective bodies. A second very important political aspect, let's say, is the electoral system. It has been observed that proportional systems tend to provide increased opportunities for women's political representation and result in smaller gender gaps in formal political representation. Also, with regard to minorities, proportional systems have been associated to a higher rate of ethnic minority representation and to an improved Muslim representation in particular. This is especially true for the election of Muslim women. A third aspect I would like to stress, a third concept, a very important concept, is the concept of descriptive representation. When it comes to minorities' political representation, an important element is the adoption of legal mechanisms aimed at ensuring the election of minority candidates in light of the idea of a descriptive representation, which is also called a mirror representation. The idea that political institutions and especially legislative bodies should proportionally reflect the social articulation of the different groups and communities by means of legal mechanisms such as reserved seats, proportional electoral systems, decentralization, federalism. Before saying something about that with regard to Muslim women, we must stress that descriptive representation can serve as a mechanism for obtaining a substantial representation, which refers to the effective influence of minorities on the political process, but it doesn't ensure it. So, to put it simply, being voted and elected as a Muslim by Muslims, voters, does not necessarily means pursuing Islamic political goals. Can we talk about a descriptive representation of Muslim women in European countries? If we consider Muslim women in their being Muslim, I would say no. In fact, in Western Europe, institutional mechanisms aiming at guaranteeing political participation and representation do exist, but they usually work for national ethnic minorities and linguistic communities, and do not apply on the basis of religion. Therefore, in European countries, the diversity of parliaments, mirroring the diversity of our multicultural societies, is more the result of political dynamics, and has more to do with the effectiveness of political participation of Muslims and of Muslim women in particular, and with citizens-free electoral choices. In any case, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands are probably the European countries where Muslims are mostly integrated in the political arena and mostly represented in the electoral bodies. 2020 study reported that the UK has a comparatively higher percentage of rate of parliamentarians with minority background, 65. The 10% of the House of Commons, so comparatively higher than that of other important European immigration countries such as Germany, with 58 minority parliamentarians, and France with 35. In France, at the last legislative elections, the 2022 elections, there has also been a slight decline. Now they are 32. However, also in the UK, if the House of Commons reflected the UK population with its 14.4% of ethnic minorities in 2019, there would be around 93 members of parliaments with minority background. Muslim women as Muslim. If we consider Muslim women as in their being women, here's the question, obviously, is about gender quotas, which, as you know, are positive actions aimed at promoting, at accelerating the achievement of gender-balanced participation and representation by establishing a defined proportion of number of seats to be filled by women and or men, generally at the level of political parties candidates. As you know, there is a lot of criticism about gender quotas with regard to both their legitimacy vis-à-vis the equality principle and their efficacy. But research shows that quotas are a good thing for women candidates and have been influential in many countries in promoting women's political inclusion. But how does all this relate to minority women and especially to Muslim women? Let's take, for example, the French case. In France, the parliament adopted a law promoting an equal access of women and men to electoral mandates and elective functions in 2000. This law obliges political parties to nominate the 50% women candidates in most elections. The passing of the law, as you can imagine, fueled a huge debate, with many opponents arguing this was against the universalistic conception of French citoyenneté. And what is interesting from our perspective is that those who supported the law and therefore contrasted this universalistic conception of citizenship, did not extend their reasoning to other minority categories, such as ethnic and religious groups, and in particular the female component within these groups. On the other hand, we can say, we have to say that parity, so the parity law in France has been considered to have activated, if unintentionally, the promotion of a more general descriptive representation, with the consequence that in the last years there has been a growing number of minority candidates at the local level, especially at the local level, although these candidates, and especially female candidates, are usually placed in unwinnable seats. Trying to make some conclusive remarks about this very, very complex topic, we have to stress that Muslim women in Europe have to face a specific vulnerability. We could say a multicultural vulnerability, in Ayelet Shakar's words, that can be traced also in the political realm. There's no doubt that the mindset has to be changed. Muslim women are usually ethnicized and depicted as, at the same time, religious fundamentalist and in need to be saved. Like Paola recalled this concept of Muslim women as subjects that need to be freed, to be saved, where being saved from the oppression actually means being more like us in the West. Traditionally, ethnic and religious minority women have undergone a specific disadvantage in terms of political participation and representation due to the multiple jeopardy of intersectional discrimination. The political and legal responses of European states to this structural problem of underrepresentation largely differ depending on several factors, such as the nature of formal politics in that country, the conception of nationhood and citizenship, the attitude towards the expression of cultural and religious diversity in the public space, but also cultural ideologies, as well as legal differences about discrimination laws and affirmative action policies. So a very complex landscape. So while I agree that the question of Islam in the political arena must be conceptualized not in the light of an Islamic exceptionalism, but rather in terms of resignified citizenship and political participation, as Giovanna Spanò stressed in an article last year, very interesting article. On the other hand, the possibility for Muslim minorities and Muslim women in particular to really participate and be substantially represented at the political level remains a very controversial issue that definitely deserves much more attention and research. I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria Clara. I go fast because we are late.
Oh, okay.
And no, I didn't say this to short your time, but to immediately give the floor to Chiara Correndo. Chiara Correndo is a research fellow of private comparative law at the University of Turin. She's a young and emerging researcher and scholar in the field of Hindu law, law and gender, law and society in Asia. The speech of Chiara will concern advocacy women in state courts. She will focus on how state courts and the use of state law can become tools of empowerment and identity redefinition, also within the indigenous minority communities and the local institutions of self-government.
Okay,
Chiara,
thank you.
it's your turn.
Can you hear me without the microphone? Can you hear me without the microphone or? Great, okay. How can I switch it off? Okay.
Per la registrazione.
Okay, no,
It's okay.
okay. Thanks. I do have a PowerPoint presentation,
Yes.
which is a quite exceptional event. Sorry. My daughters. Non inviamo. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for these very, very interesting presentations. So what I'm going to talk about today may seem a bit far under many respects from the European context, but I assure you there are many, many points in common. This presentation is based on the fieldwork that I did in India in 2017 with Adivasi women. Adivasi means indigenous, roughly speaking. And before talking about women's rights to land and their strategic use of courts, I would like to give you some background notes just to understand what I'm talking about. So this state in red is Jharkhand, where I worked. Jharkhand is quite a new state because it gained independence in 2000 from Bihar. On papers, it's very rich. Be it enough to think that Jharkhand alone provides half of the total coal of India, and the same goes for other minerals. So many rivers flowing on the territories, but a tiny percentage of Jharkhand is irrigated, tiny percentage is cultivated. Most of the people there live below poverty line. So this means that population and territories do not benefit of these rich resources. And why is it so? Because there is a high exploitation of resources going on since time immemorial. Unregulated industrialization policies, dispossession of lands, forced displacement of people. And who pays the highest price in this whole context? The Adivasis. As I said, Adivasis, indigenous people, they make up 8% of the total Indian population. In Jharkhand, 26%. Mostly all of them live in rural areas. Many of them, a high percentage, suffer, especially women and children, suffer from chronic anemia due to rural famine. They used to be almost 50% in Jharkhand, but they were forced to migrate in other states because due to these wild policies of industrialization, traditional jobs are no longer available in rural areas. So you may see how all these discourses about Adivasi exploitation of resources are very much intertwined with land rights. So there is this broad discourse about land rights, but what I noticed in my fieldwork is that indigenous women's claims in these big narratives are completely glossed over. In my interviews, we had different actors emerging. On the one hand, for example, we had the indigenous activists, men and women, who were claiming that Adivasi society is perfectly egalitarian. We have this separate but equal situation, meaning that men and women are different, we have different roles, but we complement each other, so no problem there. On the other hand, we had Adivasi feminists who instead claimed that indigenous women face multiple intersecting forms of vulnerability due to discriminatory practices perpetrated by the society at large and their own indigenous communities. So Adivasi feminists interrogate power structures within this milieu, the society and their own indigenous community. The problem is that indigenous communities are afraid of voicing indigenous women's claims because they are afraid they may lose compactness in the society against the wide public. Their struggles may be weakened in the eyes of the public. So women's claims are considered as being disruptive in this whole context, okay? Just some historical notes. The topic of women and land emerged as a key point during the UN's Women's Decade, and legal reform was sought at the national level. In India, the debate about women's property right gained momentum after the independence, so 1950s, more or less. The issue of women's land came up as a key point only in the 6th five-year plan, so basically 1980, which is very, very late if we consider that in India 70% of farming is done by women in this ongoing process of feminization of agriculture. Of this 70%, only 6% of women have actual rights on land, meaning they can really dispose of land, alienate the land, enjoy the products of the land. Okay. This is also further complicated by a constitutional and legislative fabric which is chaotic in India. I don't know if you are familiar with the Indian legal framework, but it's chaotic. Constitutional fabric. Agriculture and land have been encapsulated in the so-called state list, meaning that it's a matter to be handled by the several states. India is a federation. Property and succession, so also succession to land, is a matter to be handled by the state and the federation together. So there is this problematic collaboration in which women's rights, have been completely left behind. Plus, another point of complexity is the fact that succession falls under the personal law regime, whereby the several religious communities are governed in family issues and property issues by their religious norms. Okay. As regards, for example, Hindu personal law has been heavily amended in terms of women's property rights. The last significant amendment dates back to 2005, where daughters and sons were put on an equal foot as regards inheritance. So daughters are now entitled to the same share as sons in ancestral property, meaning land. Okay. In this complex framework, where is the space for Adivasi women, for indigenous women? Indigenous women are explicitly excluded from the purview of personal laws. This was done with a view to avoid legal assimilation of indigenous population within, for example, Hindu communities. But the point is that Adivasi and Adivasi women are governed by a mix of customary norms and colonial era legislation. What do we mean by customs, and how do we prove customs in courts? That's the key, one of the key points here. Customs are supposed to be proved in courts by evidence of existing practices, statements of local people, recorded evidence, but usually lawyers and judges do not do these things. In Jharkhand, for example, they use colonial era ethnographic sources drafted by British administrators, encapsulating, crystallizing customs, or what they thought customs were. And these ethnographic sources are treated as authentic proof of tribal practices in courts. So the customs so recorded are affirmed as legal and valid. They are fixed in times, and basically, these sources brought about an ossification, a rigidification of what was meant to be flexible, customs, okay? The problem is that not only courts, but also the legislator in Jharkhand used these old ethnographic sources to draft the laws. For example, one of the main tenure laws disciplining women's rights to land is based on these colonial era ethnographic sources, which were never updated, which incorporated a vision of Adivasi society, which is patriarchal, patrilocal, patrilineal, and all that, and in which women have very few rights. What is this customary framework I'm talking about? The customary framework that we find in these sources. For example, if a father decides to effect a partition of land, the daughter gets a share for maintenance of land until she gets married. When she gets married, the land is redistributed among her brothers. What happens if the father dies? Upon father's death, the widow gets a share of this land. She has a life interest in this land. She doesn't own the land. She only has a life interest in the product, so usufructuary rights. When she dies, the land goes to the son who took care of her during her life. Daughters do not inherit. They only have a share of land for maintenance until they get married. When they get married, the land goes to the brothers. Okay. If they don't get married, they have to choose a brother to live with because they cannot live alone. Okay. And the brother gets the land to maintain the sister. Okay. So you see, patrilineal ties in this case act as mediators of entitlements. And that's the framework upon which the courts and the legislator relied upon over the centuries, over the decades. In this framework, how can Adivasi women carve out their space? This point opens up other theoretical aspects. The first one, Adivasi women in Jharkhand, what I experienced, can and do appropriate terms, constructs, and procedures of positive law in formulating opposition to this patriarchal framework. This is due to, let's say, the multifaceted aspects of positive law, which can be seen at the same time as an elitist tool, hegemonic, but also as an instrument for the so-called formal legal resistance, in that it provides, for example, language and locale for emancipation. And here comes the role of the courts and the emancipatory use of the courts on the part of women. I'll get to that in a second. Second point, this use of courts on the parts of women allows us to overcome the theoretical dichotomy between customary and state law. I mean, is there really a choice to be made between the two to protect women's rights, or should we consider customary and state law as intersecting legal spaces, what Paola was talking about, instead of insulated legal spheres? And the third point is that the deployment of forum shopping strategies and the appropriation of some aspects of state law do not amount to let's say, straight abdication of indigenous jurisdiction. Adivasi women use state courts to redefine, to draw the boundaries of what it means to be an Adivasi woman, to shape their legal subjectivities, and therefore to produce legal knowledge about Adivasi women. Just some theoretical points. In legally plural arenas, disputants have to navigate between judicial options, as was said before. So they put up forum shopping strategies. They choose the best options on the basis of financial constraints, expected outcomes, and all that. Some authors have said that forum shopping strategies are not women-friendly because they may end up reflecting dynamics of power usually playing out against women. From my experience, from my view, this is not exactly true. I mean, forum shopping in the Jharkhand context, at least, is helpful because women navigate between forums, community forums, then they go to the formal courts, then they go back to the community forums, and this increase their bargaining power within the community. Practically speaking, from the interviews that I got, women in these communities, especially women victims of violence, do not usually go to the police. They usually go to the community forums as a first step. They prefer village justice because it's quicker, it's more flexible. The headman that I interviewed in the village said that whenever a family issue arises, especially domestic violence, the first step is the Women's Council. If they try to facilitate a mediation, if they cannot facilitate this mediation, then the issue goes to the village. It's called Panchayat, that's the village council. The point is that within these community forums, the solutions that they usually find is compromising, usually not women-friendly. They may impose some pecuniary fines of a modest entity. Sometimes they may also impose that the perpetrator marry the abused women. So this is not, this is not women-friendly. And Adivasi feminists themselves say, in these community forums, there is no space for women. And that's also my experience. These pictures were taken during the fieldwork. This is the community panchayat I took part. It was 7 in the morning and I was literally the only woman there. They were talking about women's issues. So who should run for that post? But there were no women. The women involved were not there. When the panchayat ended, it began the Women's Council, the Mahila Sabha, that's how it's called, and they were discussing these issues I talk about. So my experience is that there's no place for women in these community forums, so that's why they use these forums to talk about solutions, and also formal courts, which become a tool of empowerment or empoderamento, which is a word that I prefer rather than empowerment, in which they engage with their own community, they engage with their with the state's institution, and with their identity as legal subjects. On this basis, if you allow me just 5 more minutes, okay, okay. On this basis, I'm trying to carry out a jurisprudential analysis to map this strategic use of, on the part of Adivasi women, of formal court, to advance their claims on land and to redefine their identity. There are older judgments and more recent judgments. Older ones are more conservative. One of the most important ones is Madhu Kishore versus State of Bihar and others, issued in 1996. In this judgment, Madhu Kishore, she's an activist, she challenged some section of the Jharkhand tenure laws, some sections incorporating discriminatory customs about inheritance and the devolution of occupancy rights to sons and daughters. The Bihar state filed an affidavit in which said, there's no need to amend the law, everything is perfect like that. The majority, the Supreme Court majority opinion, it was a 3-bench court, said, we don't want to subsume this issue under the Hindu personal law. We don't want to treat the disputants as if they were Hindus, because they're not, they're indigenous people. We want to respect their customs. Yes, we do recognize that women have a life interest in this portion of land. This life interest guarantees the right to livelihood, which is integral to right to life, and that's an important step. Yes, please, dear state of Bihar, amend as soon as possible the law, but no, we don't want to strike down these discriminatory customary provisions. So the court ended up ruling in favor, let's say, of the status quo. But nonetheless, this was a very important judgment because the court, it represented a fracture. I mean, the Adivasi society welcomed it with much unrest, especially male leaders, with much unrest because it gave women a weapon to be wielded at the local level. The Supreme Court minority opinion said men and women, daughters and sons, should be put on an equal foot in terms of inheritance. Okay, there's no need to perpetuate this discrimination. That was very important. And if we look to more recent judgments, we see this progressive trend going on. They keep on doing this constitutional text, so testing customary practices against the Constitution, article related to right to equality, equality, right to life, and even more important, there is this reversal of the burden of proof. So it's not the women who have to prove that that specific discriminating custom does not exist, but it's the reverse. Men do prove that this discriminating custom exists. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. Okay, otherwise we will apply the constitution. Okay, so just to sum up and conclude, there are still many weaknesses in all this situation. There has been no reform in land rights so far in Jharkhand. There is no consistent approach towards discriminatory customary provisions. For example, many lawyers are forced to argue that their clients are Hindus, so that the more favorable Hindu personal laws is applied to Adivasi women. This is dangerous given the political climate in India, okay, treating Adivasi as if they were Hindus. That's dangerous. But still, it's the quickest way to get a more women-friendly judicial solution. But there is evidence of a strategic use of the courts in which women manage to bend the customs and redefine who they are and what do we mean by customary norms. That's it. Okay.
Thank you, Chiara, for a very interesting intervention and contribution. I strongly wanted to include in this panel a speech, a contribution on India, because India represents the paradigm of legal pluralism in the contemporary post-colonial countries. And I believe that it's very, very interesting experience to be studying. And in Italy, I believe you are in the comparative law, you are the most brilliant and expert scholar on India and personal laws. Very fascinating, this world of personal laws and the problem of the constitutionality of personal laws. But I believe that the recent judgment that you quoted represent a very important turn, a constitutional turn towards a constitutional gender equality also inside the roots of Indian legal system. Well, now we have the debate. We have two interventions that I know we have two young colleagues. One of them was already quoted by Chiara Locchi. We have Giovanna Spanò. She's not only our project manager, the project manager of European Law and Gender module, but she's also a young scholar in Islamic law. Then Giovanna, please come here. No. Here.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So it's a pleasure to see you in person after my email spam with all my communications about dinner, about attendance, and all the rest. So a key point, I think a key word is transformative constitutionalism. And it is well known that the expansive trends of right is often fostered by courts, by the circulation of reasoning, by an integrative use of comparative law. But I think that there are also two other directions to investigate, especially when dealing with a macro comparison between, for example, system based on the rule of law and system based on the rule of traditional law. Well, transformative constitutionalism. India, for instance, provides a clear example of transformative constitutionalism because the Supreme Court ruled for the recognition of same-sex relationships, first decriminalizing them, and before actually also the recognition of a third gender. Nepal also is a good example of transformative constitutionalism because the Supreme Court ruled for the recognition of a third type of people. So in these cases, traditional categories or definitions are a tool for a particularistic way to attain the same goal, which is to promote and guarantee fundamental rights in general or promoting pluralism in sexual orientation and gender. But this transformative trends, I think, have to be investigated with other two trends in the comparative scenarios, which is conservative and regressive constitutionalism. Conservative, for example, a case is offered by the High Court's Windhoek in Namibia. Actually, the High Court criticized a case ruled by the Supreme Court of Namibia called Frank, which did not recognize same-sex relationships and same-sex marriages. But the High Court would not evidently overrule the Supreme Court judgment, but just suggested to the Supreme Court with courtesy and reverence to see again that ruling that was violating massively all the Namibian citizens' rights. And a third trend could be that of regressive constitutionalism. Surprisingly enough, but maybe not that much, an example is provided by the so-called Euro-Western model. In fact, we all know that it's very recent, the judgment by the Supreme Court of the United States about the right of abortion. And I feel that marked a step backwards in fundamental rights in general and women's rights in general. And that was a violation of millions of women's rights, maybe rights that we thought were not questionable anymore. So we want to ask ourselves, also in the research, as research topics, how many and which scenarios are still to be developed when talking about gender rights in particular and fundamental rights in general, beyond the well-known paradigm of maybe progression and transformation in a positive sense. To me, it's...
Thank you, Giovanna. I invite here Paola Paglia. Paola Paglia is a research fellow of Public Comparative Law at the University of Florence, and she recently wrote a very important book on multiculturalism, fundamental. A very good book on multiculturalism and fundamental rights of the courts. Please, Paola.
Thank you a lot, Elettra. I'm so happy to be surrounded by these beautiful statues and also by these beautiful people who had an important part during my studies and also during my career until now. I would like to speak about some lines cross-cutting the interventions of today, and in particular, there is something that these interventions have in common, which is the tensions among different concepts and different rights. So ideological battles are recurrent, and this happens for many reasons. We usually need to simplify the reality in order to understand it, and also taking a stance on matters is something that is illusory, but also at the same time so irresistible in this time of uncertainty. And finally, also as Landon reminds us, that is the right talking that somehow impose us these battles. However, many authors, Paola, Parolari, ciao Paola, and also Valentina, Chiara, sorry, and Valentina before. I mean, they told us that these conflicts sometimes are just apparent, and that looking at cultural diversity and gender equality as proxies of a necessary clash is a demystification, and it is dangerous. At the same time, though, we are still struggling to find a satisfactory synthesis. And especially in the when we think about the question of minorities within minorities, which is another common aspect of today's speech, which I think is one of the most difficult question that we need to face and analyze even deeper and more. And the terrain here is again dominated by two different conflicting ideas. On the one hand, we can reject any scope for agency, but in this way, the subjects disappear. On the other side, we can give a prominent space to agency, but we risk to dismiss the need for protection that Chiara before highlighted. The question is, what should the law do? We know that there is obviously the intersectionalist approach, which is so often recalled, but how? So there is an issue that recently sparked my interest following some papers written by Cassastein, Alison Stewart, and in Italy, ELaN PO concerning gender equality in religious institutions. So we can think, for instance, to some religions, such as the Catholic Church, which do not allow women to be ordained as priests. And according to some, the state should take specific measures, in a repressive measure, in order to counteract the gender discrimination. Against this approach, there is the secular idea that prohibits the state to interfere with the religious domain. However, somehow, I do not think that this is really an irrefutable argument. Instead, it seems to me that there is another strongest question, which is again an ancient question, a radical question. Who is entitled to speak and who is entitled to turn to the court? I'm curious to know whether the indigenous women you mentioned before were somehow supported by activists or decided on their own to do something before formal courts. And what the law can do to promote this holistic approach. So in these specific cases, for instance, I was mentioning about of the religious institutions and gender discrimination. So what the law can do in order to allow freedom of religion and gender equality to mutually reinforce each other's, and in this way to empower people and communities. I'm curious and also to know about the new word you somehow trying to present instead of empower.
Empoderamento.
Empoderamento. Thank you, and sorry I was a little bit long.
Thank you, Paola. Any other question? Blanca?
Your really inspiring speeches.
Sorry, Blanca. Can you hear the intervention? No. It's better. Now?
No?
Try to speak? No. It's better to come here. I'm sorry, but every time it's in this way. Come here.
Shall I hold this?
Yeah, well, thank you all for your really inspiring talks. What I think there is an underlying issue here. Somebody has spoken recently, sorry, I don't know all your names, about transformative constitutionalism, right? And I think there's been a theme underlying all your talks, which is agency, or as I prefer to call it, relational autonomy. And I think speaking about giving people the floor, giving people voice, as has been just suggested, I think we first have to begin by acknowledging that people are autonomous, by acknowledging women's autonomy regardless of the decisions they take, because we have the tendency in the West to judge people's autonomy depending on what they decide, what the outcome of the decision-making process is. And we have to acknowledge that autonomy is a procedural matter. It is not dependent on the outcome. And in that respect, I couldn't help but think about twisting the title. It's multiculturalism bad for women? Is state law bad for women? Maybe we should start by questioning, by reflecting about that instead of judging other cultures, because the way we implement our law is terribly bad for women. I don't know who we think we are to judge other people's ways of dealing with it. And in that respect, I have a question for Paola. Paola, in your contrast between Boaventura dos Santos' approach, sociological approach, and the interlocking approach to law, how about dealing with family questions, with marriage questions in legal terms that are sociologically shaped? Let me explain. Instead of using the concept of marriage, using the concept of family, much closer, it allows you to be much closer to sociological changes. We have the Spanish constitutional framework, I'm Spanish, the Spanish constitutional framework allows for that because marriage and the family are protected constitutionally in different articles, in different parts of the constitution. There's a right to get married, and there's a right to marriage, the marriage institution, whereas families, well, they're not protected as on the basis of fundamental rights unless you channel the protection through the right not to suffer discrimination. So this difference allowed the Constitutional Court to develop a doctrine on the basis of which family forms could be protected regardless of marriage. And I'm thinking of polygamous unions, of second wives, Islamic wives who get no protection. And honestly, I don't know of cases where that have been channeled through family. I know of many cases where the second wife asked for a survivor's pension and was denied it because it was part of a polygamous family marriage, and maybe it should have been channeled through family. This went to the European Court of Human Rights. With La Nena, you might know it. I was trying to look up the date, but I didn't have Wi-Fi connection, so I couldn't find it. It's early this century, I believe. How about using the concept of family to protect women instead of marriage, which is much more narrow? And I'm not suggesting anything, I don't think, revolutionary. We already do it. We all have this wild card rights, like I'm thinking of privacy. Right to privacy, to private life has allowed the Constitutional Court, the European Court of Human Rights to embrace situations that remained a little bit beyond any defined, closely defined law. So I don't know, Paola, whether that would be part of Dos Santos' approach, or it is a more legal approach in the sense that it allows you to play with legal concepts, family as a legal concept that actually allows you to embrace social situations that otherwise would remain as unprotected. That's one thing. Another question to Maria Chiara. I have worked on women's representation, and as part of the justice system, no, according to Nancy Fraser, no representation. I was meaning to refer to that later during my talk. My concern is not only that descriptive representation doesn't stand for substantive representation. There's political scientists in general, Lena Wegnerud, if I pronounce it correctly, Swedish political scientist, speaks of cross-fertilization processes. There's no causality, but there is a process of probability cross-fertilization. So the more women, the more likely it is that there will be substantive representation, although there's no causal chain, but okay, at least the possibility is there. But this is, it's such a devilish system. The number of women in ballots doesn't determine the number of women elected. The number of women elected doesn't determine the number of women with political power. And I could tell you at length about how parliamentary commissions are constituted in Spain. We have a really high level of women in parliament, but parliamentary commissions where power is, only 1/3 is presided, is headed by a woman, whereas women all do the research work. Women do head research commissions. They do head commissions where there's hardly any political power. So that's another burden, another step. And having more women there doesn't mean having gender-friendly policies implemented. But beyond all that, my thought is, why are we so focused on parliament at a point when parliamentary democracies are in crisis? Power is not in parliaments. Power is in political parties. Power is in the financial world. Power is in people who design algorithms. Power is in places where we are not talking about parity. So it concerns me. I heard Marcela Rios once speak, a Chilean political scientists speak about how women reach parliament when or institutions where institutions are being deprived of power. And I have to think back of times of dictatorship in this country, Italy, in my country, Spain, in Portugal, when were women granted the vote for the first time? During Mussolini, during Estado Novo in Portugal, during Primo de Rivera, even though we don't celebrate that. We celebrate the time when women were actually granted the vote in a democratic context. But the first historical moment is one where the vote counted for nothing. So my concern is that maybe an excessive focus on parliament might just come to not resignify the constitutional citizenship, but to resignify an institution that is devoid, more and more devoid of power, and distracts our attention from the point where power is actually being exerted, which is political parties, financial world, algorithms, lobbies, trade unions, perhaps. But parliament, yeah, a bit, but less and less. So they're my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Blanca. Now we are late. 4 minutes for each speaker. We can start from you and go back.
Okay, I'll be very quick. As regards your question, Adivasi women, the world of activism, especially in Jharkhand, is divided. I mean, there are Adivasi activists who tend to mute women, and there are feminist activists who tend to support Adivasi women, and that's where I worked with Adivasi feminist activists. They help women in filing this case in courts. The judicial system in India helps and facilitates this filing of case on behalf of other people. It's called public interest litigation, and that's one thing. The other thing, empoderamento, is a word which has been used by Mariana Dotti. She's a translator. She translated bell hooks, and she said, I much prefer empoderamento instead of empowerment, because empowerment equals all that, those Western-driven development policies, whereas empoderamento is more linked to the global South and the struggles in Latin America. So I much prefer that. Okay. Thank you.
Maria Chiara?
Yes. Thank you, Blanca, for your thoughts. I really understand your point, and I also agree with you at the deep level, I would say. Maybe as a public comparative lawyer, I'm not ready to give up with the democratic principle, with parliaments, with the idea that political representation is a key factor to to our constitutional states. And also, I would say that political participation and representation and the importance of women and minority women, of Muslim women active presence in the political and representation in the is also about the local levels. So maybe more research is needed in the active presence and the importance of the active presence of women, of minority women in the city councils at the local level. I think of, for example, an important Italian local councillor in Milan, who is from Perugia, is Sumaya Abdelkader. I think that now she's not a local councillor in Milan anymore. She is consultant with the city council. So maybe the local level is a key factor to resignify citizenship and political participation and representation. Thank you, Blanca.
Thank you, Paola.
I want to thank Blanca. Yes, so many questions. Also, so many thoughts also from the other speakers. So I don't know how to answer. I just choose the last question that Blanca asked me about Santos and the use of the sociological concept of interlegality in order to broaden the legal concept. I would say if you use family instead of marriage, of course, you can maybe have more room for legal interpretation, of course, but also I would say that still also family is somehow a legal concept, and that all legal concepts are somehow culture sensitive. So I'm not sure that we solved the problem. But if you ask me that whether Santos can provide for different perspective to deal with the discussion over how to define family as well as other concepts which are, I mean, between legal and social sphere, I would say yes, because the aim of Santos, especially in his book on a new legal common sense, is to promote and describe a movement which he calls subaltern cosmopolitan legality, or subaltern legal cosmopolitanism, depending on the perspective you take, which is counter-hegemonic in nature, and which tries exactly to call into question the way in which we look at law, and to make clear and show how law works in cutting reality and defining it, so that we have legal objects from out from social situations. So how we define social situation from the perspective of law. If we take this perspective and we take the idea of a subaltern cosmopolitan legality as promoted by Santos, I think that we can listen to other voices in order to define what we are used to call legal concept and subjects. And so maybe we can broaden the meaning of this concept and create room for inclusive or more inclusive policies and laws. I don't know if I'm clear. I tried to say many things in few time, and maybe it's been a little confusing, but so that's it.
Thank you, Paola. Okay, now we have the second panel. Only 2 minutes for technical arrangements, but we cannot do a real break because we are late. Sorry. We'll have the lunch after the end of the second panel. Then in 2 minutes, we're going to start the second panel. The chair is my colleague and friend, Professor Angioletta Sperti. Angioletta and Blanca, please come here. 2 minutes and we're going to start. Thank you very much for all the speakers and the other scholars that intervened. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So we can start with the second panel. The second panel will focus on access to justice and gender identity. So I would like to say a few words to introduce the panel. So in a seminal work of 1976 entitled Access to Justice, Mauro Cappelletti argued that the right of effective access to justice has emerged as the most basic requirement. He said the most basic human right of a system which aims at protecting human rights. So he saw access to justice as instrumental to the protection of classic, such as new social rights, because their enjoyment, he said, presupposes mechanisms for an effective protection. So is it clear access to justice is a very broad notion. As it has been already emphasized, the principle is enshrined in Article 6 and 13 of the European Convention of Human Rights, in Article 47 of the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, which guarantee the rights to a fair trial, to an effective remedy, as interpreted, of course, by the European Court of Human Rights. Furthermore, these general principles is also enshrined in international documents, such as the Articles 2 and 14 of the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and in Article 8 and 10 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So although there are some differences in perspective among those provisions, access to justice might be summarized as equality of arms before justice. So this right enables individuals to protect themselves against infringements of their rights. So this implies, as Cappelletti argued, that policies addressing the equal social access to justice should not be reduced to what we call judicial charity. So gratuity of defense, of course. They should also refer to an authentic system of effective protection for the weakest. So where the law or the justice system discriminates on the basis of gender identity, access to justice is compromised. And where the law or justice system do not take into account the economic, the structural, the cultural barriers concerning gender identity, access to justice is compromised. The justice system is not representative. So nonetheless, perfect equality in access to justice is utopian, as many scholars remark, because differences, of course, can never be totally eradicated. So the basic issues revolves around how to pursue the utopian goal of access to justice in relationship with gender identity. In terms of access to justice and gender identities issues, the barriers that should be removed can be identified at least in 4 categories. Structural barriers that exist within the legal system, structural barriers that exist outside the legal system, the reasons why someone does not seek to access the system in the first place or chooses, for instance, to leave a legal process, and finally, access to fair decision making. So moving from the perspective adopted by Cappelletti, we understand that access to justice shares concerns for not only concerns for representation, it should be placed in a wider perspective, focusing on a panoply of institutions and devices. So this is especially relevant for gender identity in order to tackle or even prevent the barriers limiting people from accessing to justice. So today, we will address, of course, we will mainly focus on structural barriers in terms of gender identity within the legal system. Nonetheless, denial of access to justice especially for instance, for trans people, has roots in cultural, economic, and social problems. Therefore, we will start this panel today with the first paper of Anna Lorenzetti, who will focus on the Italian legal framework and the condition of trans people in a wider perspective. At the same time, she will also clarify how trans people notably suffer higher rates of justiciable legal problems compared to other citizens, including medical treatment issues, police actions, employment difficulties, and family law concerns. But most of all, they suffer trans-specific discrimination in overt or covert ways. So that, as it has been emphasized in existing literature, sometimes they also have difficulties in identifying the grounds of discrimination they endure, whether or not they are trans-specific. So I give the floor to Anna Lorenzetti for her paper, for the presentation of her paper. So please, Anna, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Angioletta. Thank you, everybody. And first of all, I have to sorry because I will speak in Italian, but I think it's better than my Italo-English, so it's maybe more easy to understand. Dunque, buongiorno e mi scuso per parlare in italiano rispetto a quelli che sono le nostre ospiti e i nostri ospiti stranieri. La necessità di fare alcune, come dire, voglio dire un inquadramento, però alcune precisazioni di merito e di metodo su quella che sarà la mia presentazione, che va a collocarsi, e lo diceva la nostra chair, all'interno di un panel dedicato al tema dell'accesso alla giustizia rispetto all'identità di genere, e che però mi sembra importante rilevare per come si colloca nella dimensione che mette a tema le prospettive, diciamo la prospettiva di genere, che come il genere interroga uno dei temi classici per il diritto costituzionale, cioè il tema dell'accesso alla giustizia. E lo voglio sottolineare non soltanto per quella che ne è stata la lettura che la Corte di Giustizia e la Corte di Strasburgo negli anni hanno offerto, andando a rimarcare come nella costruzione dei profili antidiscriminatori l'identità di genere fosse il deplano da includere all'interno della nozione di genere, poi confluita nella direttiva cosiddetta rifusione 54 del 2006, ma perché mi sembra proprio importante, come dire, metodologicamente riaffermare quello che è il filo rosso che implicitamente mi sembra legare sesso, genere, orientamento sessuale, identità di genere nel quadro, nel contesto del sex gender system, quindi per come contestualizzano, problematizzano quello che è una sorta di paradigma implicito fondato sulla condizione di diciamo normalità assunta come tale, resa paradigmatica, resa requisito dall'ambito del diritto della necessaria eterosessualità delle relazioni, e accanto ad essa la costruzione binaria e dicotomica come inevitabile, come ineludibile. Due altre precisazioni, la prima delle quali vuole essere una excusatio petita, se volete, o non petita ma comunque detta, perché io sono sempre più in difficoltà e sempre più negli anni recenti, non so cosa pensino le colleghe, in particolare Stradella e Sperti, nel discutere di questi temi da una prospettiva che mi vede però, non so come dire, colpevole, coautrice di un'operazione che dall'esterno non voglio sembri di appropriazione egemonica, perché io ho lavorato tantissimo sulla condizione trans, avevo tanto scritto già dalla fine degli anni 2000, perché si trattava di un tema veramente a cui ho dedicato tanta passione, tanta fatica, tanto studio, però mi rendo conto, ecco, voglio condividere con voi la consapevolezza di essere collocata in un contesto da una posizione di alterità, e dunque non voglio dire che non voglio rendermi complice di questa appropriazione egemonica che implicitamente sto facendo, però che ne sono quantomeno consapevole, e sotto questo profilo ringrazio tantissimo le organizzatrici per aver invece avuto l'accortezza, la cura di coinvolgere chi di questa dimensione identitaria è portatore in prima persona, e parlo di Gianmarco Negri che parlerà dopo di me, senza paura di aver fatto alcuna operazione di outing, perché la sua vicenda è nota e pubblica, dunque so bene di non offendere. L'ultima premessa, e poi vado al cuore della mia relazione, mi è venuta da uno spunto di Simona Lanzoni, che è in sala, con la quale ci scambiavamo il profilo della dominazione egemonica in un contesto che parla di gender perspective, di statue che hanno a che fare molto con la fisicità maschile. Su questo apro e chiudo una parentesi, però c'è molto, come dire, accompagnato in una riflessione di come anche gli spazi pubblici siano profondamente dominati nella loro esteriorità, nella corporeità, e come l'arte, la storia dell'arte e la rappresentazione artistica in qualche modo riflettano quella dimensione di gerarchia e di gerarchizzazione che vede comunque il femminile costruito in un rapporto dicotomico dalla posizione della dimensione oppressiva che riveste. Ma andando diretti al cuore della mia relazione, diceva nella sua introduzione Angioletta Sperti come il tema dell'accesso alla giustizia nella lettura che tutti riconduciamo intuitivamente agli studi di Mauro Cappelletti vede rispetto alla condizione trans il profilarsi di tutta una serie di barriere che vedono il mondo del diritto porsi con una serie di ostacoli aggiuntivi che sono ostacoli di matrice plurale, sono ostacoli di matrice giuridico-legale, sono ostacoli di natura sociale, ma anche molto spesso basati sulla inconsapevolezza che il piano sociale finisce per riflettere e però al tempo stesso replicare e reiterare, che derivano in ultima analisi, ora vado un po' come dire, un po' rapidamente al cuore, di quella costruzione dicotomica e binaria che ancora oggi vede il sistema giuridico in gran parte delle società della Western Legal Tradition, con le eccezioni di cui credo poi ci parlerà anche Blanca, comunque certamente il sistema italiano chiaramente marcarsi in tale dimensione. Allora è ancor più importante tenere a mente come quella che è una dinamica, non voglio dire di forzata riconduzione alla dicotomia, ma quantomeno di pressione in quella direzione delle persone che manifestino una identità di genere trans o comunque non cisgenere, finiscano per generare e abbiano finito negli anni dall'approvazione della legge fino a tempi molto recenti per generare delle modalità applicative, delle modalità interpretative della stessa che come dire, finiscono per richiedere alla persona trans di essere direttamente ricondotta non solamente nella scrizione anagrafica, nel nome, ma anche in quella che è proprio la sua assegnazione corporea all'altro sesso, con quello che è il percorso di transito, di transizione che la nostra legge 164 consente fin dai primi anni 80, dal 1982 in particolare. Però questo profilo sappiamo è stato negli anni, diciamo, piano piano, progressivamente, non voglio dire scardinato, però quantomeno smussato, fino a una serie di pronunce fondamentali che dal 2015 hanno visto prima la Corte di Cassazione, poi la Corte Costituzionale, con due pronunce, la 15.138 e la 221 delle due corti rispettivamente, affermare quello che in realtà già la legge letteralmente avrebbe consentito, cioè la possibilità di cambiare, di intraprendere il percorso di cambiamento di sesso inteso proprio in termini giuridici anagrafici come la legge richiede, senza l'intervento necessariamente da praticare sui caratteri sessuali primari. Questa lettura può essere, come dire, doppiamente interpretata, da un lato come la riconduzione alla dimensione identitaria, dunque all'autodeterminazione, alla libertà di scelta della persona, il se e il come sottoporsi a un intervento chirurgico. In realtà mi pare, ma su questo ascolterò volentieri Gianmarco, che sicuramente è molto più dentro di me per la sua attività di legale, ha visto costruirsi quella che a me pare di poter delineare una sorta di topografia sul piano nazionale, per cui in alcuni fori si agisce e si continua comunque a richiedere l'intervento totale di riconversione corporea, in altri invece si interpreta, assumendo il canone ermeneutico della Cassazione e poi della Corte Costituzionale, si interpreta più un termine che mi pare più costituzionalmente compatibile, conforme, quella che ha invece la possibilità di cambiare sesso senza però una modifica totale o una modifica necessaria dei caratteri corporei. Questo lo sottolineo perché mi sembra paradigmatico di un andamento che possiamo definire una sorta di step and go del sistema giuridico italiano, perché da un lato ha visto tutta una serie di modifiche che hanno introdotto delle nuove difficoltà e delle nuove barriere. Penso ad esempio ad una modifica dell'anno 2011 che nel contesto di una riforma dei riti processuali, una riforma dichiaratamente volta alla cosiddetta semplificazione, ha in realtà sulla carta quantomeno ha aggravato quello che è il procedimento, introducendo di fatto delle barriere aggiuntive sul piano sicuramente economico, perché ha reso il procedimento come procedimento non più di volontaria giurisdizione, ma procedimento contenzioso, quindi con relativo aggravio dei costi, relativo allungamento dei tempi, comunque con un doppio passaggio giudiziario, ma su questo poi tornerò. Come primo inquadramento mi sembra importante come da un lato vi sia stata l'opera del legislatore che con una legge che negli anni '80 era all'avanguardia ha invece introdotto una serie di gravami ulteriori, invece che seguire quella che è un po' la tendenza di tutti gli ordinamenti contemporanei in questo periodo, cioè deburocratizzare, e dall'altro però le prassi abbiano in parte mitigato e così anche l'interpretazione dei giudici di merito, di legittimità e dei giudici costituzionali. Accanto a questo mi sembra anche importante riprendere alcuni degli spunti che ho colto nel panel precedente, perché, come dire, vi è anche la necessità di assumere una consapevolezza di come noi parliamo di un accesso alla giustizia rispetto alla condizione trans, rispetto all'identità di genere, e però questo va contestualizzato per come le diverse condizioni personali di chi vive la condizione trans si combinano tra loro con quella lettura che possiamo definire di discriminazione in forma multipla o, secondo me, più correttamente in una prospettiva di più marcata dimensione diciamo intersezionale, valorizzando l'intersezionalità non come la somma delle diverse condizioni, ma come chiave di lettura, chiave prospettica critica, che questo fa sì che la differenza di condizioni personali possa generare delle ulteriori barriere, delle barriere aggiuntive. Cito solamente due casi paradigmatici, ma insomma la casistica è assai più ampia, le condizioni legate all'età, in particolare penso ai minori, rispetto a cui è altamente considerato problematico l'intervento prima dei 18 anni, anche dopo aver acquisito la piena maturità e dopo che questa è stata, come dire, accertata, acclarata dalle equip che prendono in carico la persona, ma anche su questo c'è una rapida, mi sembra, evoluzione, ma soprattutto mi sembra importante sottolineare come le barriere aggiuntive si pongano rispetto alla condizione di chi è cittadino o cittadina straniera. Questo non tanto per l'accesso alla giustizia e l'accesso al percorso di rettificazione che, essendo in Italia agganciata alla tutela della salute, dunque alla lettura forte dell'articolo 32 della Costituzione come diritto alla salute, marcato come fondamentale dalla Costituzione, vedono però tutta una serie di difficoltà aggiuntive. Penso soprattutto alle vicende di alcuni cittadini sudamericani che hanno potuto sì sottoporsi all'intervento chirurgico, però senza la possibilità poi di vedersi riconosciuto nell'ordinamento di origine, con una serie di difficoltà in fase di rinnovo del permesso di soggiorno, perché si sono trovate senza documenti e senza la possibilità di rinnovarli con l'identità acquisita. In questo quadro a me pare che si debba considerare come vi siano alcuni contesti in cui in particolare ancora oggi la dimensione trans e le vicende legate all'identità di genere si sposino con una particolare problematicità. Cito in particolare quelli che sono dei contesti, degli ambiti anche spaziali, che si mostrano come ostici per le persone trans, poiché in essi vige ancora un'organizzazione profondamente basata sulla separatezza, sulla segregazione in base al sesso. Ospedali, assistenza sanitaria, che molto spesso è ancorata alla diversità di corpo, che la transizione chiama in causa, ma anche su questo ascolterò volentieri Gianmarco. La detenzione, la privazione della libertà personale anche di chi sia diciamo così accolto, ospitato si dovrebbe dire nei cosiddetti CIE, o mi sembra di poter dire privato della libertà personale nelle strutture che sarebbero deputate all'accoglienza dei cittadini stranieri, ma penso anche al mondo della scuola che è profondamente organizzato oggi su una dicotomia, o ancora al mondo dello sport che dopo essersi in maniera assai problematica interrogato sul tema sta aggiungendo, vedo numerosi documenti di soft law delle federazioni internazionali di tanti sport che sono progressivamente intervenuti, il che, diciamo, non voglio esprimere un giudizio di merito su ogni singola posizione, ma quantomeno il tema è stato squadernato, è stato posto all'attenzione ed è stato dotato di una, diciamo, quantomeno circondato di una consapevolezza e dotato di una dignità al centro del dibattito su questi temi. Ecco, a me pare che dunque dovendo noi organizzare, profilare quelle che possono individuarsi come barriere, noi si debba tenere in conto come rispetto al sistema socio-giuridico, legale, ma anche in qualche modo rispetto al contesto culturale di riferimento in Italia, le barriere si profilino sotto numerosi punti di vista. Penso dunque in primo luogo a quelle che sono delle barriere di natura psicologica ed emotiva, perché a differenza di quelle che sono le condizioni legate all'appartenere a delle minoranze in termini numerici per altre condizioni, non so, la disabilità, religione, condizione etnica, le condizioni legate all'identità di genere vedono spesso, non sempre per fortuna, però una ostilità anche nel contesto familiare. Ad esempio, vi sono stati dei casi che hanno visto insomma, fenomeni di forte ostracismo, e chiamo ancora una volta in causa il tema della scuola, che comunque su quella ascrizione anagrafica organizza tutta una serie di attività. Penso alle attività legate, non so, alle gite scolastiche, all'educazione fisica, in cui comunque l'appartenere a un sesso o all'altro non è certo la stessa cosa. Ma in particolare il tema della famiglia che mi è cara, perché sempre più mi interrogo su chi difenda il minore dalla famiglia quando chi sarebbe deputato alla cura non se ne occupi, ma tornerò nella parte conclusiva su possibili soluzioni. La matrice che mi sembra anche ancora più significativa è quella che vede una serie di barriere di natura giuridico-legale, molto spesso però legate più all'organizzazione burocratica, proprio agli aspetti di pura organizzazione amministrativa, anche dell'amministrazione pubblica, che non a ragioni e motivazioni ideali. Perché il percorso che ancora oggi vede tutta una serie di fasi, di step, di verifiche, di controlli intermedi, ha tutto sommato conosciuto una evoluzione della legislazione, mi sembra di poter dire tutto sommato debole evoluzione rispetto a quella che era quantomeno l'aspettativa quando negli anni '80 noi fummo il terzo paese in Europa ad introdurre una normativa che consentiva a titolo completamente gratuito di accedere a questo percorso. E ricordavo prima come invece barriere siano state progressivamente costruite nel 2011 quando venne approvato il decreto legislativo 150 di cui parlavo poc'anzi sulla cosiddetta semplificazione dei riti. Ma le barriere possono essere tante. Angioletta Sperti prima parlava del tema del lavoro e della famiglia. Ecco, in ambito lavorativo, per quelli che sono i profili proprio di ambito di prova di essere stati discriminati, la prassi giurisprudenziale mostra una straordinaria difficoltà, con una debolissima capacità di azione di quella che sarebbe la regola sull'inversione dell'onere probatorio che il diritto antidiscriminatorio prevede. Questi sono i dati a mostrarlo, che vedono pochissime condanne. Nell'ambito del diritto del lavoro ci sono 0 condanne, almeno a quanto ne so io, a meno che non ci siano pronunce non note, non circolate, non pubblicate. Questo secondo me ce la dice lunga sulla sul cattivo funzionamento di una regola che sulla carta invece sarebbe tale da consentire una maggiore facilità di prova, che in questo ambito, ricordo, è prova libera, quindi ci dovrebbe essere veramente una grande facilità. Eppure l'unica pronuncia, che peraltro è stata riformata con una Cassazione recente, ha riguardato il tema dei servizi, dell'accesso ai servizi, dunque della discriminazione nel contesto degli affitti. Ora, l'ambito della famiglia mi sembra ancora più paradigmatico, perché collocato in un contesto come quello italiano, rigidamente ancorato al profilo dicotomico, ad esempio, che vede il matrimonio come unicamente fondato sulla diversità di sesso anagrafico dei contraenti. Su questo segnalo, ma penso sia cosa oramai nota, una